Good morning and welcome to Be Better at Business TV. I'm Jamie Gorman with Sigma Business Management, and we're here this morning with John Stewart of Vantage Economics. Morning, John. How are you?
Good morning. Good. How are you?
Why don't you start, John, by just telling us a little bit about Vantage Economics, kind of what you do and what your background is a little bit.
Well, I'm an economic consultant, which basically makes me a data guru for businesses.
Okay.
I've been an economist for over 20 years now, had experience with the Department of Labor, but now working mostly with private firms, doing a lot of forecasting with them, a lot of strategy analysis, doing a lot of projections, risk analysis, and the like.
Good, good. And I know you have your blog also at VantageEconomics.com, so
yeah.
That's great. Well, good. Well, this morning, over the last couple of years, there's been a little bit of economic news. I guess you've been a little bit busy with that. And so I wanted to really get started with kind of what's the latest, where are we at? We had this recession, there's a recovery, then kind of not a recovery. And so kind of where are we at now? It's September 2012, a few years removed from the initial boom. And where are we at?
Right.
What's going on?
Well, you actually summarized it pretty well.
Okay.
Where are we at? It doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that we've had a little bit of a lull here. Starting in the first quarter of this year, the economy slowed. It didn't contract. We didn't see a recession.
Okay.
But now we're in the summer and things have basically flatlined. So the focus has been, over the last couple of weeks, how can monetary or fiscal policy help bring us out of this? How can it stimulate the economy?
So, and just, to clarify, a couple terms there. First, the difference between a recession and just a contraction. What makes something a recession versus just, hey, it's just a bad economy or just a contraction?
There are a lot of different definitions to that. The more formal definition is if you have at least 2 consecutive quarters of negative gross domestic product, which is the measure of all the goods and services in the economy.
Right, okay.
So we haven't had that. Last quarter, we saw growth of about 1.7%.
Okay.
Which basically means anything below about 2 to 2.5%, you don't feel great.
Right. Okay.
The average person really doesn't feel that boost, and so for a business, you're basically seeing growth about what you've seen over the last couple of years.
Okay. And then you talked about, of course, monetary policy and fiscal policy. Really, you're talking about taxes, government spending, interest rates, those types of things that kind of make the news big. But those are the kind of things that government can control, I guess, and
that's right.
Try to help the economy.
That's right, and that's what the Federal Reserve is trying to figure out. Of course, yesterday in the news, there was the announcement that they're embarking on QE3, or Quantitative Easing 3, which basically means that they're going to try and pump more money into the system, and they're going to try and keep interest rates low.
Okay.
Now the question is, how effective is that going to be? And even by the Fed's own admission, it's not going to be as stimulative as back in 2008, 2009, because interest rates are already very low.
Right. Okay.
So they're wondering exactly how much of an impact this is going to have. So they're trying to impact longer term interest rates, which can help businesses to some degree.
Yeah.
And it's going to be somewhat helpful, but it's not going to be as helpful as earlier, and it's not going to be as helpful as we would hope fiscal policy could be.
Okay, great. And Alyssa, do we have a question from one of our viewers?
Yes. What do Obama and Romney have planned to help the small and medium-sized business owners?
Well, so there's a question I think on everybody's mind. We have this election coming up, and they say it's about the economy, right?
Yes, they do. Yes, they do.
So what are some of the things that are in the news that the politicians are talking about right now that are going to have the most impact, or could potentially have the most impact, positive or negative, on economic recovery?
Well, it's a very interesting discussion, right? Because a corollary to that, or on the opposite side of that, is our discussions about the debt.
Okay.
So we want to stimulate the economy, and most of what we've done historically is increase government spending under those conditions.
So increasing government spending, you kind of stick money into the economy.
Exactly.
It gets, people
you
are able
hire-
to hire more,
Right.
but then it also adds to the national debt typically.
That's exactly right,
Okay.
because you're not taxing at the same rate,
Right.
right? You actually drop taxes.
Okay.
So that people, instead of spending on taxes, they're spending to hire people, they're spending
Good,
on
okay.
physical capital, all those different things.
Right.
Both candidates have proposals to reduce the corporate tax rate.
Okay.
Interestingly, there's not a significant difference in what that target rate is between the
Okay.
two candidates. But there's going to be an interesting discussion, especially if Romney is elected, as to how far they're going to go with cuts in federal spending.
Right.
There's a big push, especially on the Republican side, that, hey, we're spending too much money, we've
Yeah.
got to cut back. And it'll be interesting to see how that plays out if Romney is elected.
Okay, great. And so that national debt, how does the national debt kind of affect economically? What's the impact? I mean, why not just spend more money? Okay, so we have national debt. I mean, what's the long-term impact of that from an economic perspective?
Well, we did,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
Back in
Mhm.
2008, there were spending plans that were passed. We increased spending under the Obama administration, and of course that reached record levels.
Right.
Then people began to worry about that, because that means that of course we have more to pay off,
Right.
and interest rates start to rise long term.
Okay.
But what's fascinating about all of this is that our economy and the world economy actually becomes very dependent on federal spending in
Right.
order to stimulate the economy.
Yeah.
So over the last year, federal spending is actually down over 3%.
Okay.
Nationally, overall, the economy grew by just a little bit over 2%.
Right.
Federal hiring, we see every single month, there's been a reduction in federal hiring, which then trickles through state and local hiring
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
So we have seen cutbacks over the last year, and that's certainly playing a part in an anemic recovery and
Okay.
probably some of the downturn that we saw in the first quarter of this year.
Okay. Great. Great. So, and the second part of that question, of course, was what does it mean for small and medium businesses? So, with where we're at in the economy, what should our small and medium business viewers be looking at? And then, how could this affect them long term from an election perspective?
Right, so we'll look at the election here in a second, but initially, it's complex. I help a lot of businesses do this in terms of forecasting sales and costs and the like. I think for your average small business owner, just to keep things simple, you could probably take what you did in the first 9 months of this year and average it what you did in the first 9 months of last year, and that's probably a
Okay.
decent projection of the next 9 months for you. I think that what also business owners of all sizes have to do is to take a look at their risk.
Okay.
And by that I mean, you've got to take a look at not the industry that you compete in, but you have to look at the industry that your clients are competing in.
Okay.
And then even one removed from that, take a look at what
Right.
your clients' clients are competing in. Because ultimately that has a domino effect on you.
And what's a good example of that? So that's, we kind of think that, okay, yeah, our clients, but, what about our clients? Do you have any good examples of kind of an industry where that could, or you've seen that be effective?
Yeah, for example, manufacturing. We look at one of the ways that I help businesses is to look at how they can diversify
Okay.
who they're selling to. I have a client that sells a lot to the aerospace industry,
Right.
which is very volatile
Yep.
and is heavily dependent on defense spending.
Yes.
So now we're trying to figure out how you might be able to diversify
Okay.
some of that risk and start looking at other clients that might be able to buy those products.
Right. So in other words, he's selling to the airlines or the
Exactly.
those manufacturers, and then they're selling to the government. Well, if the government is looking at cutting, that could potentially mean
That's
airline
exactly
cutting.
right.
And so he's got diversification.
Right.
In my situation.
And they
Okay.
they do copper cabling.
Mhm.
Well, it's not the copper cabling industry that you're so much
Right.
concerned with here. It's what's happening in defense spending, what's happening in aerospace.
Right. And so what they need to look at is copper in a different industry.
That's exactly right.
Yep.
That's exactly
Okay, good.
right. Yeah.
Great. Okay. And so so small medium businesses kind of have to look at that, and then what about the election as far as, going back
Right.
to that question?
Right.
Is what are some of the one or two of the key things that they should be paying attention to?
I wish that I were more optimistic about what's happening. I think that, as we discussed before, both candidates have on the table proposals to reduce corporate taxes,
Okay.
which should help, but again, it's kind of marginal.
Right.
They are looking more heavily at what might happen to individual tax rates.
Okay.
There are significant differences there. I think that the biggest issue is going to be, regardless of who is elected, they've got to reach across the political aisle and get some stuff done.
Okay.
They've really got to take a look at how can they be creative on fiscal policy to not only be looking long term, how do we reduce the debt?
Right.
Obviously a key issue. And the only way you do that is to have small and medium-sized business growth. That's the backbone of our economy.
Okay.
Always has and will be during this growth cycle. So that's the key issue, I think, of, again, regardless of if it's Obama or Romney, they've got to reach across the aisle and they've got to work together in order to figure these very complex problems out. Unfortunately, I'm not that optimistic that can happen.
Okay.
So I think that small and medium-sized businesses have to look at that and think, there may be key issues, healthcare,
Right.
Things like that that might come into play, but overall, it could be more of the same.
Okay. So even regardless, good.
Right.
Okay. Alyssa, we have another question. We have a lot of small, medium business viewers, so what's the...
I can't seem for the life of me to get a loan from my bank for new equipment I want to purchase. A situation I hear from a lot of other business owners. Is anyone going to help with this problem?
Yeah, I just had somebody tell me 2 days ago, I think it was, that they went to the bank for a pretty simple commercial loan and just got nothing, got nothing, no love
Exactly.
there,
Exactly. Yeah.
What's the, and that's kind of, we expected that a little bit more in 2009, 2010, but as we're
Right.
kind of coming around, things stabilize a little bit. You're hoping to get maybe a little bit of love from the banks there. What's going on with small, medium business?
No love. No love. Banks have risk too. And as we see this anemic recovery, businesses continue, small businesses especially, continue to have problems. And if they're having problems, that means that banks are going to have problems loaning to them. Now, we've seen some freeing up of money
Okay.
to small businesses, but still the growth remains among large businesses,
Right.
Which makes sense if you're looking at it from the perspective of the bank, because there's less risk for them to loan money to a larger size
They're more
company.
diversified.
They're
got
more
the various
diversified,
things,
they've got market share.
background, they've got pipeline, they've got customers that they can draw on.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
So it's much harder for small to medium-sized businesses to get those loans. So you've got to do, one of the things is to do the due diligence, right?
Okay.
You've got to do your homework. You've got to go into a bank very well prepared and have all your T's crossed and I's dotted.
Okay.
It helps to bring in, I've helped with that as well with small to medium-sized businesses in
Right.
terms of their negotiations with banks. Because you can bring in a third-party view of your internal data.
Right.
You can do your forecasts, you can look at risks, and you want to bring somebody in that can speak with the bankers. They can
Right.
talk their talk, right?
Yeah.
You can talk the numbers, you can do all these things. A lot of business owners don't necessarily feel comfortable doing
Right.
that. So if you can bring in a third party that's a non-partial view, as well as be able to talk to somebody on their level, that will help in that process.
And I know, just because I know you do a lot with industry research as well. And
That's
so
right. Yeah.
I'm sure that probably helps a little bit in the process is, having somebody come in and talk about where the industry is going and
Absolutely.
the region, right?
Absolutely.
Because, you might have a national economy that's doing one thing, but the local economy could be a lot different. I know we saw that here in Northern Virginia. Our economic crisis was a lot different from Detroit or Las Vegas or some
Absolutely.
of those other locations.
Right. Yeah, you take a look at those different geographic components, and that can have a large impact on your business. And that actually brings us back also to diversification.
Right.
It might not only be the industry that you diversify to or away from, it could be a specific geographic location.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of marketing information that's available, a lot of science, a lot of data that's available that you can look at in order to pinpoint specific geographic areas that you
Right.
want to start marketing more aggressively to,
Yeah.
or
Or
even
pull
avoid.
back, yeah.
Right. And we see that even with some of these crises. You know,
Right.
people think that it's abstract, but it's really not. I just did a blog yesterday on the impact that the European crisis could have on local geographies. So you look at a place like Japan. If Japan were to fail, I know
Right.
that's not part of Europe, but if Greece fails, that's going to have a significant impact on Japan because they hold a lot of Greek
Right.
debt.
Got it.
So transportation, you know, the areas that in the Midwest, Ohio and Detroit, those areas that are heavily involved with transportation manufacturing could be significantly impacted.
Okay.
And then again, you take a look at, well, if I'm selling to these industries, or if I have a client that I sell to directly that sells to those industries,
Right.
eventually that's going to have an impact on my business.
Okay. Great. So one other thing I wanted to ask you about is the job market. I know some job reports have come out, and maybe good, maybe bad. You know, I know
Right.
that we've had that discussion about that. Hey, just because unemployment's down doesn't necessarily mean
That's
that,
right.
that it did that. So where's employment at? You know, where's the job market, and where's that?
Yeah, there's the Fed's talking about. You'll hear it in the news. I won't go into detail on it, but they talk about their issues with interest rates being already low and a liquidity trap.
Right.
We're actually more, I think, in a consumer trap, right?
Okay.
That is, businesses need consumers to spend more money so that they'll hire more, but consumers aren't going to spend more until they see more hiring.
Right.
So it's this trap that, and jobs are the pivotal issue. Last month, though, we only saw 96,000 jobs created. In order to really start drawing down the unemployment rate in a real and significant way, and I'll tell you what I mean by that in a moment, we've got to see job growth of 300,000, 350,000 every month.
Okay.
Over the last 3 months, we've only been averaging less than 100,000.
Okay.
So it's very weak. Now, like you said, well, you know, the unemployment rate kind of jumps around. What does that mean? We saw the unemployment rate tick down slightly last
Right.
month, but that was primarily due to the fact that people left the labor force.
Okay.
So it's the definition of unemployment that's really moving this. If
Yeah.
you're looking for a job but don't have one, right? But you suddenly stop looking for a job, you're no longer counted as unemployed.
Right. Okay.
So the number dropped mostly because people left the workforce, not because they found a job.
So yeah, so probably a little bit discouraged. So it's really, I guess, and it's an unemployment rate, but it's really not the same as the number of people who aren't employed, right?
That's exactly right.
It's really the unemployment. It's you have to be looking for work to be considered in that report. So if you
That's right.
get frustrated or something happens and you figure out something else, and so you're not actively looking for work, then you're not in that number of unemployment. So
Exactly.
that had something to do. Okay.
Exactly.
Well, good. Understanding that number, I think, is good for all of us to be able to do. So.
Right.
All right, so we've talked a little about what's going on and you know what to look at, but what do you see in the future? I know you do some things with some leading economic indicators and
Right.
kind of, I won't call it forecasting or whatever you do there, but really try to give businesses a picture of you know what they can expect, and especially in the next 6 to 9 months.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, as you said, I have a leading economic indicator. It remains positive, but it's still showing anemic growth.
Right, so it's very slightly positive.
It's slightly positive, that's right. And so that does, again, it indicates that we are going to see growth. I don't see a recession,
Right.
But it's going to continue to be a struggle. So like I said before, one of the things that businesses can do if you're trying to project forward what's going to happen, again, you can average what you've seen over the last 2 years for the first 9 months,
Okay.
and that's essentially what you're going to get. I'm a little optimistic because we've seen some numbers that have come out that have shown that we might see a little bit of an increase in personal consumption. That is,
Okay.
you and I going out and buying, you know, coffee or
Right.
going to a movie or these different types of things. So if we start to see a little bit of a nudge there, and of course
Okay.
that's 70% of our economy,
Yeah.
then I would hope to see a little bit more of a trickling throughout the other industries,
Oh, that'd be good.
to see a little bit of a growth.
Right.
Not a whole lot. We can't get ahead of ourselves.
Yeah.
But I'm a
I don't
little
want you being
optimistic
too
that-
optimistic,
Yes, no, you
John.
can't. You can't
I don't
do
want you
that
being
to
too
me.
optimistic.
I mean, when some of my compatriots have nicknames like Dr. Doom, you can't be too optimistic as an economist. But there are reasons to think that, again, we see the QE3 program from the Fed.
Right.
That's going to be somewhat stimulative,
Okay.
but it's not going to create this huge growth going into the fourth quarter. There are some of those headwinds. So when you look at inflation, I think that's going to be pretty close to 2% for the year.
Where's that on a level of good, bad?
That's about where you want it.
Okay.
I'm actually a little on the high side.
All right.
So inflation is an important number for businesses to understand because that erodes wages
Yeah,
if it's
yeah.
too high, right? So like over the last 2 summers, gas prices, right?
Absolutely.
Everyone's been concerned about gas prices. Why? Because people are spending less on other things.
Now, what is it that every time I get gas goes down 10 cents after I get it, and then the day I go to get it, it goes back up there? Is that
Really?
just me?
That's my experience as well.
Maybe if we get
That's
off
my
on a different
experience.
cycle,
Yeah, maybe we
that's
could
a good-
counter each other if
Exactly.
if we map that out.
Maybe we can kind of.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. And so I know that every month you come out with your Advantage Economic Indicator,
Yes,
right? And people can get that, I'm assuming, at your website.
Yep.
And kind of keep track of that.
absolutely.
And I also know, you and I have been talking about consumption, and especially personal consumption. I know that has a
Right.
lot to do with, one, money in your pocket, but also a confidence, right?
Yes.
If you're confident you're not going to lose your job, if you're confident in the future, your home price is going to stabilize,
Exactly.
then you're a little bit more ready to go out and spend and do some personal consumption.
Yeah, that's right, and that's why we look at some specific industries as leading the economy out of a recession, or in this case, anemic growth.
Great.
So some of those things are, for example, what they call durable goods,
Right.
like your automobiles. Automobiles, we've never had a strong recovery in the United States
Yeah.
without first seeing spending in large quantities on cars.
Right.
And again, that goes back to what you were saying. Most people finance the purchase of an automobile.
Right.
And you're not going to do that unless you're confident about your job
Yeah.
and you're confident about your income.
Yeah.
It's just not going to happen. So that's why that's a good indicator as to what the future growth might be and if we're really going to start seeing significant growth going forward.
So it's not all black magic. There is some science.
There is some science.
and
There is
research.
some, believe it or not, it is grounded in that science. But of course, I think that decisions are really made somewhere between what you see in the data and what your gut tells you.
Great, great. Liz, any questions for us?
What segments of the economy do you see growing in the near term?
Well, that's a good one. Okay, so where do you see the growth? I would think that probably healthcare will continue to grow. Probably all
I
the
can just
accountants
leave. Here we
associated
go.
with healthcare,
That's
but
good.
I'll let you answer and add some expertise to it.
Yeah, I think that healthcare is certainly going back to what businesses should be looking for short-term and long-term. Healthcare is a growing sector, and it's
Right.
going to probably continue to grow for the foreseeable future. They'll too have some contractions because they could be overbuilt. They could
Right.
have a bubble as well, somewhere down the road. But that's an important consideration is how might I be able to, with my business, start selling to that industry? How do I create a need within that industry for my product or service?
Yeah.
One of the things that we're seeing contracting is the finance industry still. They got too big for their britches. Not too big to fail, although that's been the definition, but in other words, they were using too much human capital and physical
right.
capital to do what they did.
Yeah.
So they're still seeing, when you look at the monthly jobs numbers, they're still seeing contraction in their employment, yet their revenues continue to rise. The same was true in manufacturing. Revenues have risen over the last 30 years, but over the last 30 years, we've continued to see regular contractions in employment.
That's maybe because automation, I'm assuming.
Automation.
Automation.
Absolutely. So these are important considerations when you're, when you're looking into your sales and marketing strategy,
Right.
you need to be thinking about what's growing, what's not, and why.
Right.
Because you don't want those efforts to fail. So when you're looking to diversify, and again, the geographic regions, where are these places located in the United States or even globally?
Right.
Naturally those areas are going to grow. So if you're looking at your business and trying to figure out, I want to open an office somewhere,
Right.
that's an important consideration. What's that local economy look like?
Okay.
Am I going to be able to sustain growth there? All those considerations have to be looked at.
And I know we're actually located in Northern Virginia in the Washington D.C. area. And what's the outlook on government contracting?
Can you say sequestration?
Barely.
It's this push and pull, and it relates to the election of what do we do over the short term, because there's got to be some sort of fiscal stimulus.
Okay.
They're not going to just let the bottom out.
Right.
Over the next 2 or 3. Exactly. Longer term, though, there are going to be significant cuts,
Okay.
even in defense. So when you look at the Northern Virginia, Maryland, D.C. economy,
Right.
that is a huge issue. I've spoken to a couple businesses about how nervous they are.
Right.
They are petrified because they lose 1 or 2 contracts and it's
Yeah.
done.
Yeah.
So that parallels what we were talking about before with healthcare. How do I, as a contractor, make whatever it is that I do applicable to some private industry?
Yeah.
And that's the key issue from a marketing and sales standpoint right now for most of those federal contractors, or even state and local contractors. How is it that I make the private sector need this?
Okay.
And that's the transition that you've got to take that into consideration, or you're going to find yourself in a lot of trouble in the next 5 years.
Okay. All right, great. Well, hey, I really appreciate you coming out. We're just about out of time.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure everybody knows how they can kind of get in touch with you. So why don't you let them know website, phone number, whatever you need to tell them.
Again, it's Vantage Economics, so you can see us online at vantageeconomics.com. You can reach us on the old telephone as well.
Okay.
That's available on the website. As I mentioned before, there's a blog that's connected to the website that you can click on from the menu items up top. It gets some forecasting, prognostication,
Yeah.
but an overall assessment of what are these changes about, what do they mean to medium and mid-sized businesses and small size as well, and how do you move forward through all these things.
Good. Well, yeah, once again, thanks for coming. I love working with John, because one of the things he does is, I work with businesses for planning and marketing and those types of things, and the economy is one factor in that. And so just things like, hey, if we see something in the healthcare industry, but we're over here in the government sector,
Right.
what can we do to maybe create a channel and to create and go into different markets, and how do we change our marketing and our specific advertising and make those daily decisions that kind of fit into that plan that's going to transition you to help you be better at business, and that's what we're all about.
Absolutely.
So we'll see you next week, next Friday morning, 11 a.m. Eastern Time, here on Be Better Business TV.